Hey, listen! Hey, listen!
Alright, I think we've heard enough of that.
Hey, listen! Hey, listen! Hey, listen!
研ぎ澄まされた運命を糧今輝くためにこの牙を向け試練は乗り越えられない人に襲いかかりはしない
What's a crack-a-lackin', everybody? Welcome to my very first episode of the Blue Boom Review, the newest segment on my channel where I take a look at games to see whether the games are a timeless classic or an absolute dumpster fire. Seeing how this is my very first attempt at actually reviewing something, let me give you a quick rundown. Basically, I'm going to be taking a look at three major aspects of the game. Story, if it has one. Presentation to see if the graphic and music quality still holds up. And most importantly, the gameplay. Once all is said and done, I'll jump straight into spoilers. Then near the end of the video, I'll rank the three topics with color numbers ranging between blue 10s and red 1s, leading up to one of the 5 overall results you'll see here on the screen. Today I thought I'd kick things off by starting with the very first game I got from my GameCube collection to see for myself if the game still holds up. But first, a little history lesson. Star Fox Adventures was released in 2002, just 1 year after the GameCube's initial release. Originally created for the N64 by Rare under the title Dinosaur Planet, Shigeru Miyamoto stepped in and was like, "You know what this game is missing? Some Zelda action with a pinch of Star Fox. Rare, make it happen!" Okay, so maybe he didn't exactly say all that, but we still got a Star Fox game that's a lot different from their previous installments. Not counting Star Fox 2, of course. For a while, the game received mostly positive reviews from both critics and gamers, but somewhere along the lines, the game seemed to have aged harder than the Cavemen show. I can understand why a game like this would garner such a negative reputation considering it barely plays anything like the core franchise it's named after. But is Star Fox Adventures really as bad as everyone says it is? Let's find out! What the? Get in there! So the story takes place on a dark and stormy night when... Go, go, Power Rangers! Okay. This is Crystal, a telepath who is also the last remaining survivor of the mysterious planet Serenia, and is searching for the reason behind her parents' death. She apparently came to this world because of Professor Xavier's abilities picked up Life Alert, as she tracks down the source of the distress call while hopefully getting some answers to some of her own questions in the process. Why am I so popular on the internet? You know, there are some questions that are better left unanswered. So after Renamon and Mega Charizard Y takes out the literal head of the ship, we then meet the antagonist of the game, General Scales. His goal is to Kohud or Taskuki Eve Dinosaur Planet. What he said. He wants to rule Dinosaur Planet using the Triforce of Power. Wait a minute. She basically tells him the Burger King mascot would make a better ruler than him, and he replies with Jeez! Dude, relax. It was just an opinion. You act like she attacked your Twitter page. But thankfully, Orange Aerodactyl over here swoops in as they pull off a Peter Pan and flies off into the distance. So Crystal and the Cocoa Puffs bird arrive at Krazoa Palace, where they find out the source of the SOS was coming from a group of Triceratops known as the Earthwalker tribe. Apparently, the king sent them to protect the palace from General Scales and his Sharpclaw army from invading the palace and releasing the Krazoa spirits, a race of peaceful spirits with enough power to give life to an entire planet. Now it's up to Crystal to enter these Krazoa shrines and take on the challenges ahead in order to return the spirits to Krazoa Palace before all life on Dinosaur Planet dies. Now, you're probably wondering, who are the Krazoas? How can spirits give life to an entire planet? Why are they dying if they're already spirits? And how come the only creatures pure enough to take on these trials just happen to be a pair of anthropomorphic foxes? All very good and reasonable questions. So after Crystal receives the shiny tentacle, she returns the spirit back to where it belongs. We soon find out the Krazoa wasn't the only thing that got released, as the evil image filter sends our heroine flying into the beam of light, trapping her in a crystal. Gee, I wonder where I've seen something like that before. I really hope her name wasn't inspired by this. Just to let you know, this is the only time we get to play as Crystal throughout the entire game. Way to pull a Sons of Liberty. So after we get our game trailer of the month, we finally cut over to the Star Fox team where...
Hey Fox! Tell Slippy to turn that crap off! I'm tired of listening to dead memes!
You got it, Gramps. Hey Slippy, shut up! Oh, screw you guys! Hey! This is a T-rated game! What? Oh crap, he's right. So General Exposition appears to try and tie together Star Fox 64 to this game's plot by basically telling him,
do this thing and we'll pay you for a thing you did yesterday!
And I guess he's okay with that as he flies over to planet Neostar. After some quality time with the R-Wing segment,
I'll get to my gripes with this part later on.
we arrive on Thorntail Hollow as we just now find out this is a no-gun zone.
This mission is about saving the planet, not blowing it up.
First of all, General Scooby Doofus, I was asking for my blaster, not the Landmaster. And second, you ordered me to stop Andros at all costs, so shut up, sir!
You're fired, Fox!
I'll buy you a box of Scooby Snacks.
Continue with the mission, Fox!
So you get the Master Sword, or the Staff of Gamelon, I guess, as the disembodied head of Crystal tells you basically that you're the chosen one. You know, if a disembodied Fox Girl head suddenly appeared and started talking to me, I'd probably tell General McGruff over here to shove his mission where the sun don't shine. Well, to be perfectly honest, at least she's not as scary as this.
Only I have the brains to rule my life.
I didn't touch this game for 2 years after looking at that. Anyway, so the rejected Koopa Troopers from the Super Mario Bros. Movie show up, and after a quick beating lesson, you meet the Queen of the Earthwalkers. She tells you her son has been kidnapped and that you gotta help him. After you feed Stone Cold some raw candy, he warps you over to Snowhorn Mountains to deal with a pretty aggravating racing section.
More on that later as well.
You eventually get to Prince Tricky.
Nice name.
It's better than Princess, at least she's not in another Sonic game.
As the two of you venture off the mountain, returning to the Queen. You find out she's come down with a serious case of the munchies, leading to Fox having to go and collect more of Dr. Mario's special medicines. After all that's said and done, she tells you the reason behind the planet falling apart is because of
General Scale.
Yeah, okay, we get it, Dragendorf. You want to take over Jurassic Hyrule. Shut up. So now you gotta stop General Fails and his army of second-hand store security guards from tearing apart Yoshi's Island by obtaining the 4 spellstones that are scattered all across the land before times, which you need to get to with the help of the gatekeepers, which they will only open the pathway after you perform some mundane tasks and return the stones back to the Force Point Temple while also collecting the spirit of Squidward and returning them back to the Palace of the Ocean King so you can save the spirits, the planet, and the Delphox version of Zelda.
At least it makes a better love story than Dawn of Justice.
The visuals are pretty good. The way the colors change from bright and colorful during the day to dark and chill at night are really nice to look at. I love the amount of effort put in each parts of the world to give them their own distinct area designs. Another thing I found out while looking into this game was a lot of the areas were from the old Dinosaur Planet builds, which I find kind of cool. Most of the character designs are really amazing. The amount of detail on their facial expressions as well as their looks are simply incredible. I have to say, after all these years, this game has some of the best graphics from 2002, but that's not to say they've all aged well. Don't get me wrong, they still look great and all. I just find it kind of odd seeing some characters with a lot of detail to their facial animations next to characters with the same facial expression qualities to that of 8-Bit Pac-Man. Of course, this is just a minor nitpick of mine, but it's one that still kind of bothers me every time I see it. It's like watching one of the CGI characters from James Cameron's Avatar go into Sesame Street. It looks weird and kind of out of place sometimes. Now as for the areas themselves, like I said before, they look fantastic and all, but how do they handle them? Some of these locations have the right amount of action thrown in to keep things interesting and engaging as you venture the area, while others slow down the pace by having you repeat a lot of the same things in the attempt to extend the game's length. Namely places like Force Point Temple and especially Krazoa Palace. I know certain games have you revisit the same places over and over again, so this is nothing new. Some games usually remedy this by either having you unlock missions to do something different for every visit, or completely change the look and tone of the location you've previously explored to keep things visually interesting as you move around a familiar and different looking environment. The problem I have with Kozoa Palace is the exact same reason I can't stand the Temple of the Ocean King. It repeats the exact same thing you did the first time by unlocking small chunks of the area and boots you back out to artificially extend the game's playtime. It's like if you get a key to one of the doors to the water temple in Ocarina of Time, and as soon as you open the door, the temple boots you back into Hyrule Fields to get another key to continue advancing. Like, why would you do that for a game like this? Let me explore in peace and stop Super Mario 64ing my adventure time, you chicken chimichangas! But that's enough about that. What about the music? How's the soundtrack at least? Wow. It's so good. The music was composed by David Wise. If the name sounds familiar, then you probably heard some of his other works like in Ukulele, the Donkey Kong Country series, and Battletoads? I'm not even kidding. Right there, as clear as day, Battletoads. Well, I've learned something new today. I really do love the variety this soundtrack has to offer. It has a handful of different types of music styles, ranging from a dramatic orchestra theme to an exotic savanna-like feel. The way the music transitions from one theme to the next as you move between locations is a really nice touch. However, if I had to nitpick, I would say that some of the areas are a bit too small to have their own dedicated themes. Like this music you're currently listening to called Leap of Faith, which only appears in one small hallway between the item room and the puzzle to get there. It's a shame this place is so small because this doesn't allow the music to leave a lasting impression. Take the Lost Woods for example. If it only played in this one small section of the forest, it wouldn't nearly be as recognizable as other Zelda themes. Of course, if you unlock the sound test, you can listen to the music whenever you want, which is fine. But for music like this to be memorable, the level itself needs to fit the size and tone the track is trying to convey. Sadly, this game handles some of its soundtrack like an overstuffed sandwich. It looks good, sure, but it's so cramped and stuffed that the more brandished flavors overpowers the more subtle toppings, making the sandwich not as good as it probably could have been and not leaving a very lasting taste. Great, now I'm disappointed and hungry.
So, this game's playstyle took a very different approach to... What?
This game's playstyle took a very different approach from its previous installments, changing most of what made the first two games what they are into a traditional 3D Zelda game starring Fox McCloud. You can ledge jump like Link, you can climb up walls like Link, even the hidden discovery jingle is the same. The difference shows in how the character controls. It's fine for the most part. The input is very responsive, but I do have two minor issues. The mild slipperiness and the lack of a dedicated lock-on button. More on that issue later. It's not unplayable, it's just kind of distracting when your running controls have as much of a grip on the ground as a typical ice dungeon. This can sometimes make things a little irritating when you're trying to solve some puzzles with this control scheme in mind. Speaking of which, some of these puzzles are kind of a mixed bag. Fox's puzzles are just fine, and the puzzles with Tricky and Fox are a little bit better but still underutilized. It's a shame because there are a lot of potential with the way you control both characters' abilities to solve them. The Force Point Temples are a prime example why Zelda games have more than 2 dungeons. Now exploring the Force Point Temples first time around wasn't really that bad, but using them again as 3rd and 4th dungeons was a bad idea in terms of creativity wise. Check out the first and second time solving the puzzles in the Ocean Force Point Temple for example. The only difference between both visits was the color of the flames, except the first time around was half as slow to solve as watching Metal Sonic's transformation sequence. I'm not saying all puzzles need to be around Professor Layton levels of difficulty, but it would have been better to have at least 2 more temples added to prevent things feeling too repetitive. The only thing worse than the Forest Point temples are the tests of the Krazoas. Most of these puzzles are pretty bland, ranging from easy to really easy to...
Oh, come on, you're not even trying!
There is one test I actually do really like called the Test of Knowledge. I won't go into details on what you need to do, but I will say that this is my favorite test out of all the Krazoa trials hands down. But then you got the Test of Fear, and oh, let me tell you, this one's a real doozy. But first, let me tell you a story about a similar annoying challenge before this one. So there's this part in Lightfoot Village where you have to do this quick time event where Fox is tied to a totem pole and you gotta make sure he survives by timing a red line that zigzags from left to right, and you have to stop it within the green bar to summon Moltres the Squawking One to barbecue these Muppet geckos as the bar gets shorter and the line moves faster the more you succeed. Now take that mechanic and change it to where this time you gotta balance the red lines inside the middle of the green bar and keep it from flying off whenever the scene attempts to be scarier than an episode of Dinosaurs. Are you insane? I hated this trial so much I wanted to kick this game down the nearest pit of death. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the last time I checked I was supposed to be playing a Zelda-esque version of Star Fox, so then why in the unholy moly macaroni chicken sandwich in this game also suddenly decided to become a frustrating around a Mario Party? Don't get me wrong, I still like the idea of playing as Fox outside of his R-Wing that didn't include Super Smash Bros. For once. Despite his movements sometimes having the friction consistency of Shadow the Hedgehog, I don't really mind it that much. Except when platforming's involved. Going back to 3D Zelda again, these games handle their platforming pretty well because Link always has a very solid traction in his movements. Without that, making precise turns for landing on smaller platforms becomes more needlessly frustrating than performing brain surgery while blindfolded in the middle of an earthquake, leading you to callously slip and fall off into oblivion. Not like the game penalizes you for it. Speaking of precise controls, I want to rant about the aiming controls for a bit because, spoiler alert, it kinda sucks! The aiming system feels more loose than one of my old N64 thumbstick controllers. Usually when I'm aiming at a really small enemy or target, it feels like the smallest push on the thumbstick will send the crosshair flying to infinity and beyond. This becomes even more apparent later on during one of the FPS sections where I gotta shoot down a horde of projectiles. Especially a part where the Jurassic Flicky starts getting into the habit of zigzagging all over the place, almost as badly as Slippy during a boss fight. This aiming style could have been done a lot better if there was an optional lock-on button. Take Metroid Prime for example. It has buttons for both free aim and lock-on functions so you can instantly switch between the two during combat or for solving specific puzzles. Of course, there are other alternative solutions besides a lock-on button, but anyways, that's enough about that, so let's move on to the game's combat controls, and thank Hylia it's a lot more tolerable. They made it work by having you lock on automatically to enemies that come within combat range whenever you whip out your mighty staff. There was probably a lot of ways I could have phrased that better. Of course, before the enemy gets close enough, just pull out your staff. Then once you're in range, you can get into position and... Dude, shut up! I'm trying to do a review! After you've locked on, you can pull off one of 3 combo attacks after landing the initial 2 hits. There's the whirling charge stab, the 1-2 strike, and the... You can also perform rolling attacks like the double stunner, and the leg sweep for dishing out quick critical damage. But if you get too far out of range or you put your staff away near an enemy, you'll break out of the auto lock position. Of course, there are certain situations where you'll have to battle in order to advance to the next area. The combat system is pretty simple but really satisfying just to smack the What? I was just gonna say fossil, you coon. However, after fighting the same type of enemies for a while, it gets kind of repetitive, like dealing with a swarm of Dark Gaia minions. There are other enemy types in this game, but they're not really worth mentioning since they usually go down in 2 hits or less, with the exception of the fire crawlers. They're pretty tough, sure, but if the most they can do is sit there and burst into flames, I'd rather move on to an enemy that can actually still move after taking a hit. As neat as the auto lock is, I still prefer using the button for the sake of convenience. For example, if I'm in the middle of bashing a crate for extra health and some random lizard dork hobbles his tail over to my general range, I'm forced to stop and focus on this Neandersaurus, and that gets pretty annoying. Another thing I neglected to mention that I like is the ability to switch between multiple enemies. Sure, it may not seem like much, but when a horde of them is in front of me, I like being able to switch targets on the fly. It can be very useful to prevent them from taking cheap shots on me and counterattacking while also focusing on taking out the weakest link. I apologize for that unintentional pun. I have no idea how it found its way into the script. Of course, during lock-on combat, you can block attacks too, but that goes without saying. However, if there's no enemies around, you can activate the staff's barrier abilities by pretty much making yourself invincible. The only drawback is you can't move while shielding. Speaking of staff abilities, there's these hidden shrines that are scattered throughout Dinosaur Planet. Going to these underground chambers will allow you to unlock a couple of upgrades, like the fireballs, the ice breath, the rocket boost, the sharp claw disguise, the TM26, the super TM26, and basically the Keyblade.
What?
These upgrades are a big help for getting past certain obstacles, as well as some of them being capable for combat purposes. Unlike the barrier though, these abilities will drain your staff's energy meter. You can replenish it by picking up these glowing crystals called energy gems. They come in 4 different colors, with each one restoring a certain amount of energy. You can usually find some of them on the ground or in these large flowers. You can also increase your staff's meter by finding these other hidden shrines similar to the ones that unlock your staff's abilities. You can easily find them whenever your controller starts shaking, or when your staff starts glowing when a shrine entrance is nearby. It's kind of like the Stone of Agony if you had the Rumble Pack attachment. Your controller would begin to vibrate more the closer you got to a hidden secret chamber of some kind, and it would keep shaking until you eventually discover the secret. Now before I get into the last bit of this video, I want to cover a couple of more topics before I finally wrap things up. First, let's talk about this game's version of Navi, Prince Tricky. Even though he doesn't go out of his way to grab your attention like she does, that doesn't mean this royal pain in the neck doesn't come with his own set of annoying quirks.
There's something near.
Look at this.
I'm hungry.
Bad guy.
Not doing it.
Let's play.
Oh, come on, Fox. I'm hungry.
Shut up, Tails!
Despite him being a nuisance, the prince can be very helpful with a handful of his sidekick commands. The Find command allows him to dig up certain spots in the ground and walls to discover hidden items and secret pathways. The Heal command makes him stay in place, great for some puzzles involving pressure switches and so on. The Flame command lets him use TM35. It allows him to set stuff on fire, melt ice, and other fire lighting related puzzles. Besides that, it's the only command useful for combining a couple of Fox's combos and staff abilities for some interesting double team combat. And the Play command. Of course, some of Tricky's commands uses up his stamina until he starts complaining about his hunger. When that happens, you'll need to look for these energetic blue mushrooms called grub tubs. But you gotta stun them first with a good smack before you're able to pick them up. You can carry up to 15 grub tubs at a time to fill up this little munch goblin completely for about a total of 3 feedings before you gotta go grocery shopping for more blue shrooms again. Next, let's get to the items. And how can I bring them up without mentioning my personal favorite character in the game, the shopkeeper?
Welcome to my store.
I love this guy. He always cracks me up whenever I go to his shop. He has the greediness of Mr. Krabs with the personality of Walter. He'll practically sell you anything, even if the item originally belongs to someone else.
Hurry and choose something. Oh, get out.
Now to buy something, you need to have this game's currency called scarab beetles. But stay on your guards when collecting them because these little critters can move pretty quickly the more they're worth. At first, you'll only be able to carry 10 scarabs at a time, but as you progress, you'll gradually get scarab bags that will allow you to carry a lot more scarabs for buying expensive items and getting past toll guards. Scarabs can be found underneath large boulders and small containers, but if you're feeling lucky, try heading over to the gambling corner in the shop and test out your luck, earning some fast cash. Now for the items, and bear with me because there's a lot of them. First, for healing, you got these fruit pots that can heal half of one of your heart containers, and these Cadbury not dinosaur eggs. Those replenishes a full container of health. Next is a Buffoon Dad.
What?
They're basically 1-ups that can revive you and let you continue from where you died without losing any progress. A 1-up bag, bomb spores, or as I like to call them, Mother Nature's C4, firefly lanterns, and fireflies. They're only useful for navigating your way around large dark areas with a lot of obstacles. Fox's binoculars
You mean my binoculars?
Hey, swiper, no swiping.
It's not swiping if you've lost it and I happen to find it for a good profit. You know what they say, opportunity always knocks for someone who's willing to answer it.
Anyways, they allow you to adjust the view distance while you're in first-person view mode. Then there's Tricky's ball. Might as well get this over with. Buying this ball unlocks Tricky's play command. When he brings the ball back to you enough times,
10 to be exact,
he'll eventually change colors. I can see this being a pretty unique idea at the time, but for the amount of times it takes just to play around the fetch, it's not really worth all that for basically a color swap. Then there's the maps for your PDA to help you navigate around the current areas that you're in, fuel cells to help you get the set areas, and lastly, there's the cheat tokens. You can find these jumbo-sized Mario coins and wells hidden throughout Yoshi's big world. However, you'll need to throw in 20 scarabs before this thing pulls a master belch and up-chucks a coin at you. You can take this coin to the Warp Stone Maze where you can activate these cheats. Despite their name, they don't really unlock any cheats, just extra stuff like sound tests, turning off subtitles, and giving out vague spoilers about the plot. Finally, I want to talk about the bosses and vehicles before I get to the final portion of this review. Now, aside from the final boss, there are 3 boss battles you'll need to take on in order to obtain the spell stones and—
Hold it! There are 4 spell stones for each boss, correct? So then why did you mention 3 bosses that you needed to exterminate? Explain! Explain!
Now, the first boss battle was actually not bad at all. It was fairly challenging, decent attack pattern in both the first and second battle of the fight, and it had a weird yet somewhat intimidating design, although a bit over the top with the glare attacks during the cutscenes. The second boss battle was kind of meh, and that's something I never thought I'd say when talking about a T-Rex. I mean, it's a freaking T-Rex! One of the most badass dinosaurs in history. So then why did fighting this boss feel so lackluster? This is why I'm not a big fan of upscaling enemies into bosses, unless the battle itself was going to be done in a creative way. A good example of this is from Yoshi's Island's bosses, where they enlarge a regular enemy and turn him into a unique and fun boss fight. While in this game, you're taking him on like any other Red Eyes, except here you're knocking him over with an electric wall instead of the Super Quake ability. Another thing that irks my jerky is the way the camera acts after tossing a bomb at the Red Eyes King. It's like the camera guy suddenly forgot he was still rolling and tried to leave the set like,
Okay, I got the shot. I'm going home now. My planet needs me.
while I'm mashing away at the L button to center the camera back behind Fox like, get back here you goober, I'm not done fighting yet! The worst thing about all this was the fact that the cutscene had a cooler boss battle than I did. Like, why couldn't I jump on the back of a T-Rex to try and bash the spell stone off of his skull, huh? I'll tell you why. It's because that would have made this battle awesome, and clearly that's not what they were going for. But surely the third boss would be a lot better, right? Oh.
Let me off, 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 let me off.
Question. How do you make the FPS flying section with Petrie's dad even worse? You throw Fox on top of this makeshift hovering board, and then add Roblox War Greymon over here and plop them both in what looks like Megalo Station and Magma Flow did a fusion dance to become the most frustrating boss stage in the whole game! It was bad enough dealing with this hot mess of a segment. Now I gotta try and shoot this spastically flying Chinese bootleg Yu-Gi-Oh monster in this cluster butt of a corridor with a bunch of crap flying at me. And why am I still restricted to 180-degree turns here? I thought I at least landed on a decently sized floating platform. Was it super glued to my feet? There's so much wrong with this boss fight, but I basically already covered my other main gripe I had with this fight from my earlier complaints about the aiming system, so let's move on. Now before anyone asks, no, I'm not going to include Snuffy, General Mozart, Grandpa Littlefoot over here, or the prehistoric pigeon in my discussion of the vehicle sections. But first, I think I need to address the elephant in the room.
I beg your pardon, young man. As you can clearly see, I'm a snowhorn, not an elephant. Get your facts straight, human.
Look, Humunga Trunk, it was a figure of speech, alright? Now shave your face and chill. The R-Wing segments are clearly the weakest part in what's basically Turok's Lucky Tail adventures. There's nothing visually interesting outside of the first couple of trips to the floating chunks of the planet. And as much as I like the remix of the Asteroid Belt theme, it gets pretty tiring listening to the same theme over again every time I'm getting ready to go into space like it's the R-Wing national anthem. On top of that, all I'm doing is shooting a bunch of space rocks and some occasional enemies while traveling in the same black void of space just to get to Dino World, Dark Ice Mines, Cloud Runner Fortress, Dragon Rock, and Wall City, and that's if I get enough rings to land there. Oh, did I forget to mention the rings? Well, you need to collect a set number of golden rings to remove this force field before you reach the end of the course, and if you didn't reach the number required by the time you got there, well then tough chicken tenders, you're doing it again! What made the first two games so much fun was the many different worlds and space you got to fight in. Each level had something visually interesting to look at as you take on hordes of enemies while you and your team explored the many vast worlds of the Lilat system. This is just a watered down version of what made those games great in the first place. It might have been better off if some of the R-Wing segments were cut out of the game to reduce the repetitiveness. explosiveness. And then there was the speeder sections, and oh boy, the first one was a pure unadulterated torture fest. Remember when I mentioned Fox kinda controlled like a less slippery version of Shadow the Hedgehog? Well then this is like controlling one of his vehicles going at 150 cc's. I despise racing against these two leather belt brains, especially here. These slip and slide controls make precise turning nearly impossible without taking last place at some point. On top of that, I gotta avoid the walls like the Fast and Furious version of Operation. The slightest touch on any surface means I'm dropping speeds faster than my internet provider. Plus, with these Iguana Breath brothers dropping bombs on me every 5 seconds, I can't maintain my speed in time, which means I lose and it's back to the top all over again!
No! No! No!
Thankfully, the other two aren't nearly as unforgiving. However, the last speeder section is where you get the second spell stone, hence why there's only 3 actual bosses to deal with when getting the remaining 3 stones. Better?
No!
Shut up. The only difference here is you gotta deal with a speeder running out of fuel while you're trying to hit the guy holding the stone until he explodes into one of J.J. Abrams' lens flare effects. And that's all there is to it, really. Time to move on to the last thing. After returning all the spellstones back to the Force Point Temple and then obtaining the 5th Krazoa Spirit, it's time to face the finale of this game and head straight for Krazoa Palace once again. Do you see what I mean by Temple of the Ocean King yet? So after you deposit the 5th Ghastly into the PC box, it's time to face the epic showdown between 2 leaders, Fox McCloud versus General Scales. And how does this long-awaited showdown goes?
Hey, throw the fight right now. Sure.
Excuse me, what? Whoa, 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 hold on, wait a minute. You mean to tell me this whole time you've been building up Captain Fossilfang over here throughout my entire adventure like he's some world-ending tyrant, and after all that hype, he goes down to a f***ing cutscene?!
Yes.
Why even focus all that attention on Captain Leatherhead if you don't even get a chance to fight him for the last spirit? That's like if after Link storms the castle and finally reaches Ganondorf, only for him to suddenly turn around and be like,
I'm sorry, I only took the Triforce of Power so I can get this sick organ.
then goes back to playing it and then credits. So after encountering the biggest letdown since the Philips CDI version of Ganon, you then set free the final Casper the Transparent Tentacle Porn to the Palace of Missed Opportunities and rescue Princess Crystal. But it turns out collecting all the magic Frillish was just a ploy to resurrect Dr. Zayas as the true final boss battle begins. What a twist. So Falco Deus Ex Machina is way into the battle, you beat the evil space monkey, Yoshi's world is finally put back together and Crystal joins the team. But still not actual playable character in Smash. What the fuck? And that was Star Fox Adventures. Was it as bad as everyone says it is? No, not really. I really did like the story, especially when it was an Ocarina of Time. No, I'm just kidding. But on a serious note, the story started out really strong with a new character and world, but it fell flat on its face when the story decided to take a hard left turn, trying too hard to mix in the Star Fox elements. Most of my main issues with the story comes from Crystal getting locked away, and the plot with General Scales going nowhere other than to shoehorn Andross into the story just because he was the main series antagonist for the last 2 games. But a lot of poor decisions were made with some of the game's lore either feeling like half of it was missing, or the story contradicting itself with the Spellstones putting the planet back together only for the planet to pull a JK moment just so you can get the last 2 spirits. Orange. Most of the game still has a very nice appeal to it. The main cast looks great and very well animated, while some other characters don't look as detailed but still decently designed. As for the worlds themselves, well, Dinosaur Planet was pretty good, revealing bits of areas to explore the further you progressed. However, it did have a few places I wasn't too fond of going back to, but those places were usually kind of short anyway. Dark Ice Mines was decently structured with half of it being a snowy area and the other half being a fiery underground mechanical obstacle course. It's a very fun and nice level to always play through. Cloud Runner Fortress was tedious to say the least, especially considering Fox climbs at the speed of molasses. The dungeon area was kinda dumb when all you needed to do to escape was to hug the walls to get past Sir Snores-a-Lot and grab the disguise device to get your staff back. I wasn't really feeling the objectives either, considering when you're literally next to the birds to blow your horn, but they won't react unless you're standing in that one specific spot. Wall City was alright. It had a lot of good puzzle mechanics, just not executed well enough. It would have been pretty neat if the puzzles implemented more of the day and night cycles outside of the roadblocks on the pyramids, but for what it is, it's just fine. And Dragon Rock was pretty empty. It had a few enemies scattered around here and there, but it's just a giant parking lot full of events to trigger, so basically Hyrule Fields if it was thirsty. Yellow. The game's music is fantastic. The large library of themes this game has to offer really does give off the right amount of atmosphere for these areas. There are some locations that reuses the same soundtrack from other places, but it's not too bad aside from the Asteroid Belt theme. Blue. The controls are just fine aside from the slight slipperiness after stopping. The aiming sensitivity stings, but the other staff abilities, tricky sidekick commands, and the items handle pretty well. The first speeder sections was a pain in the tail, mainly because tight corridors plus loose turning controls made things very difficult to get through. The other two speeder sections were much easier to manage because they had wider track range for easy mobility. The animal rides were pretty interesting. The Cloud Runner controls sort of like the R-Wing, but he snaps to the center of the screen after releasing the thumbstick. The Snowhorn had the slowest moves and the weirdest tank controls I ever felt, and the Earthwalker controlled pretty smoothly. The R-Wing segments were kind of boring after a while. Sure, they added more stuff for each course, but it still doesn't hold a candle to the games that came before it. General Fails was a complete waste of potential, and Andross's final boss battle was about as fun as popping bubble wrap for 10 minutes. Yellow. For a Star Fox game it was pretty weak, and for a Zelda game it just couldn't quite hit the right notes. But in the end, Star Fox Adventures tried something new, and for the most part it was kinda fun. But like most games with a lot of ambition but short time development, it just couldn't get the polish it needs to really shine, and what we got in the end was basically The Legend of Zelda in space with dinosaurs. It's really not as bad as most people make it out to be, but it's hard to ignore the fact this game already had an established lore and world to explore without the Star Fox elements clumsily thrown in. Maybe if the game had a little bit more time to polish in the Star Fox lore into the Dinosaur Planet story more smoothly, then maybe the game could have changed from a good game to a timeless classic. That is why my final rating for this game is a rental out of recommended.
That's why this control enthusiast rents from National.
Thanks for watching my first attempt at reviewing a game. Sorry for the lengthy video, I'll try to keep it short next time. I might do a follow-up video on how this game could have been better, but for now we'll see what happens. But anyways, this is the Blue Explosion 9000 here saying I am up, over and gone. Take care, have a good one, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye!